My name is Jenn McCollum, and I am Assistant Professor of English at Landmark College. I will be speaking at the speaker series this October, doing a presentation called Sexing the Zombie. The topic for the presentation comes from a larger book project that I'm doing that really hones in on the zombie prototype in the Victorian era and Victorian literature. And I came to this because a fascination with zombies. I was really curious a couple years back about where this zombie prototype came from and why we seem so fascinated in the 21st century by the zombie. I was really startled to find that the zombie motif is oftentimes read by academics to be a very new kind of concept. And so I had a desire to trace that back through time and kind of see where it had its origins, due pretty much to the same reason why the zombie prototype is so fascinating, and that's the conflation between life and death. What does it mean to be alive, a human being, different, and what does it mean to be dead, right? And more than that, the complication of what it means to be human versus animal, to be male versus female, and kind of what the body can tell us in its various forms about life and death. So that's where the idea absolutely came from. Love contemporary zombies. I am a fan of The Walking Dead. Just started up again, so I'm really excited about that. I tend to avoid maybe more contemporaneous fictions of zombies because I feel like there's a particular movement lately to kind of humanize the zombie, to make it something that deserves sympathy, empathy, that they're not so different from us. And I think that's really 21st century, and that really does show a vast progression from the origins of the zombie. It's not a trend that I'm super interested in exploring right now. I think I might come back to it in 20 years after it's moved on and look at it from a critical standpoint then. But my interest is really what came before, going as far back through time as I can. So going back in time, I definitely trace it back to Sumeria, Egypt, Israel, going back to Inanna, Ishtar, some classical mythologies, religious mythologies of resurrection, rebirth, reanimation, power over the dead, power over dead bodies, and resurrecting those bodies and bringing them forth on the earth. Of course, in my presentation, I'm going to touch a little bit on Jesus and Lazarus and getting into that mythology and how it carries over into the motif of zombification. I'm going to be looking primarily at what this tells us about gender and the gendered body. Who has the power over revenants? Who has the power over the dead? Who has the power of resurrection? And what those resurrected bodies do. One motif that really engaged me is the motif of death and the maiden from the 15th and 16th centuries, where the reanimated corpse seems to be super masculine and super aggressive and almost, and very scary to living females. So that's definitely an era of the zombie that I'm going to put emphasis on during the presentation. The way that gender plays out in more contemporaneous zombie works is a big question mark for me. I feel like it's really difficult for me to kind of wrap my mind around how gender functions in, say, something like The Walking Dead or 28 Days Later today. It seems to me as if the zombie in the 21st century and even the 20th century has thrown off its gendered garb in exchange for something that's more, maybe even class related in this century. Kyle Bishop, for example, his work on the American zombie motif really centers on the zombie affiliation with Marx's kind of proletariat prototype, and he really wants to read it in that way. And I tend to see his point with that. I think that the throwing off of gendered garb in the 21st century really speaks to our cultural moment where we might be willing to move into a new phase of how we think about gender difference. But there's a question mark there for me for sure. I feel like I'm not going to get a grasp of that maybe until the moment has gone by. Stay tuned for the Victorian zombie. Just kidding.